Good morning. It's January 5th, 2025. I'm doing an early morning read of my Bible. So I read through a couple passages, just flipped through my book. I started out with Isaiah 30, Zion's future prosperity, verses 23 through 26. Then I flipped through my book again, came to Habakkuk 3, Canticle 1 through 11. I also read 2 Samuel 5, the capture of Zion by David, and Luke 13, which is Herod's desire to kill Jesus, verses 31 through 33. So these two readings, 2 Samuel 5, capture of Zion by David, and Luke 13, Herod's desire to kill Jesus, 31 through 33. These two are very close readings to each other. It's interesting that Jesus is considered to be a descendant of the line of Judah, a descendant of King David as well. So in both of these stories, 2 Samuel 5, capture of Zion by David, and Luke 13, Herod's desire to kill Jesus, the Luke 13, Herod's desire to kill Jesus portion is directly after Jesus does the parable about the narrow gate and talking about the way for salvation and redemption is through the narrow gate. And same within the capture of Zion. David ends up going through the water tunnel in order to defeat the city of Jerusalem. As you recall, David is fighting against Saul. So 2 Samuel... the book of Samuel, 2 Samuel, is actually the story of the beginning of David's reign over the city of Jerusalem. So yeah, in both of these stories, both Jesus and David end up going to Jerusalem, and they go through the narrow way. So I find that pretty interesting that these two stories I ended up flipping to today both correlate very closely to each other. I also noticed in a lot of the readings, I was looking at the different numbers. I like to look at numbers, numerology. I noticed that you see the number 3 quite often, 333, 222, 111. So I looked at those numbers, those different angel numbers for the messages. So in the angel number 33, means that it's a powerful symbol of divine presence and protection and love, and that's when Jesus enters into Jerusalem. Also, you see in the capture of Zion, you see 2 and 5, 25 being the birth date of Jesus in December, and then 2 and 5, 2 plus 5 equals 7. Or the holy number, that's the number associated with David entering into Jerusalem as well. Other numbers that I see, 111 is an angel number. It's a sign from the divine of a new beginning, and in this case you see a new beginning for both King David and then also Jesus, as they both decide to stay in Jerusalem as their place, as their destiny. 222 angel number, I also saw that as well. It means harmony, balance, or spiritual alignment. And so again, in both of these stories, you see that both main characters, King David and Jesus, go into spiritual alignment with divine destiny or providence in recapturing. David captures the city of Jerusalem, and then Jesus in this particular passage, it's a very brave passage. I'll just read it to you. It's really short, but it's where the Pharisees come to Jesus and they tell him, King Herod is planning on killing you. You better get out of here. And Jesus tells them, look, I'm staying no matter what, because my destiny is Jerusalem, and so I'm going to stay here as a prophet of God. He called himself a prophet in that passage, so I'll go ahead and read that real quick. So Luke 13, Herod's desire to kill Jesus. At that time, some Pharisees came to him and said, "Go away, leave this area, because Herod wants to kill you." He replied, "Go and tell that fox," it's interesting that he calls him a fox, "Behold, I cast out demons, and I perform healings today and tomorrow, and on the third day I accomplish my purpose." So he's going to stay no matter what. He already knows what's going to happen, and he's taking a leap of faith. He's being brave, right? He says, "Yet I must continue on my way today, tomorrow, and the following day, for it is impossible that a prophet should die outside of Jerusalem." So he's committed to staying with Jerusalem as the prophet. So I also looked at the number 333, which is associated with this passage. You see Luke 13, 31, 33. 333 is taking a leap of faith towards change, spiritual growth, and manifestation. It's an angel number. It means to trust yourself again with self-love and accept destiny. I started this reading this morning at 4:44 a.m. Giving this guidance, and that's another angel number as well. I notice it means angelic guard and guidance, heavenly protection, usually associated with Archangel Michael. So I found this pretty interesting that I'm doing this reading at this time of 4:44 a.m. So yeah, you see the numbers 111 in these passages, 222, 333, and then as I give this guidance, it's 4:44 a.m. So yeah, so let's go ahead and go to 2 Samuel 5 because that's very similar as well in the reading of this particular reading. You see that in this passage, Luke 13, it follows right after Jesus gives the parable of the narrow door, salvation and rejection. He says, most people will strive to enter through the narrow gate, for many, I tell you, will attempt to enter but will not be strong enough, right? And so in the story of David taking over Jerusalem from Saul, he doesn't go through the main gate. He goes through the water tunnel, right? And so if we flip all the way to 2 Samuel 5, we see the capture of Zion. Then the king and his men set out for Jerusalem against the Jebusites who inhabited the region. David was told, "You cannot enter here. The blind and the lame will drive you away." This is like the story earlier with, it's very similar to Luke 13, right? So he has a choice between going through the main gate or going through the narrow way, and he decides to take the water tunnel instead. David cannot enter here, but David did take the stronghold of Zion, which is the city of David. On that day, David said, "All who wish to attack the Jebusites must strike at them through the water shaft. The lame and the blind shall be the personal enemies of David. That is why it is said, the blind and the lame shall not enter the palace." But David then dwelt in the stronghold, which was called the city of David. He built up the area from the Milo to the palace. David grew steadily more powerful, for the Lord of hosts was with him. Right? So these stories of 2 Samuel 5 and Luke 13, 31 through 33 are almost identical because, King David, who was an ancestor to Jesus, both in the line of Judah, right? They're both going to Jerusalem. David to capture the city, and Jesus in his own way to capture the city spiritually, right? So they're both going, both stories are stories of extreme bravery, leaps of faith, and total trust in God and in the destiny and divine providence of God, right? So then we also look at Isaiah 30, Zion's future prosperity, 23 to 26, and I'll just flip through that. Oh, I also wanted to note here, so this is interesting, right? So I had this bookmark in my Bible, right? It says, "What is love? I have met in the streets a very poor young man who was in love. His hat was old, his coat worn, the water passed through his shoes, and the stars shone through his soul," right? So this reminds me of David, actually, and it's Victor Hugo who wrote the book The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which I find pretty interesting because in that story you have two men of faith, right? The older man and then you have the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and they're both strong in their faith, but the older man is kind of similar to a Saul, and David, King David, is kind of similar to the Hunchback of Notre Dame, right? Two very different, both men of faith, but two very different ways of approaching their faith. David's more spiritual, and the other minister is more literal and traditional in his interpretation of faith. So it's very similar to the story of Saul and David. So so Isaiah 30, Zion's future prosperity, 23 through 26. So let's go to Isaiah. So this is Isaiah 30, which I found kind of interesting because it says right here at the beginning of the book of Isaiah, it says, "Isaiah denounced the covenant with death and again summoned Judah to faith in Yahweh as her only hope. But Yahweh delivered the city as Isaiah had promised. God is the Lord of history, and Assyria but an instrument in his hands." So the chapters 1 through 39 are the oracles from Isaiah, faithfully reflecting the situation in 8th century Judah. So chapters 1 through 33 are called The Lord Alone, Israel and Judah's Salvation, whereas 1 through 33 or 35 are also called The Lord Zion's Avenger. So this is just like a reiteration that everything is controlled by God, right? And Lord, the Messiah. So Zion's future prosperity, I'll just read a little bit of it. He will give rain for the seed that you sow in the ground, and the wheat that the soil produces will be enriched and abundant. On that day your cattle will graze in spacious meadows, the oxen and the asses that till the ground will eat silage tossed to them with shovel and pitchfork. Upon every high mountain and lofty hill there will be streams of running water. So this is just a story that like everything comes from God, right? And good things and prosperity and abundance, they also come from God and the Lord. And the Lord is heavily associated with Jerusalem and Zion. So if you look earlier up into the passage of Isaiah, in 21 you see, while from behind a voice shall sound in your ears, this is the way, walk in it, when you would turn to the right or the left. So this is like that God got your six, right? Where God is behind you telling you which way to turn. This is the way, walk in it, right? So that's the leap of faith, walking by faith and not by sight, leaning on God's word and leaning on God's providence and direction as to whether you should turn right or left. And just like in these passages right here. So you have David and Jesus, right? And they're leaning on God's word, and they're choosing which way to go based on God's word and God's prophets and